Thank you. Thank you to the thousands of survivors, of victims who have shared their stories, who, faced with the horror of the most terrible crimes, found the strength to speak out for themselves and for others. Thank you to all the victims who, though voiceless, have not given up, who struggle on despite the darkness that shrouds them. Remember, you're not alone. You're surrounded in every building, in every street, in every town and city by those ready to help you. You don't have to explain yourself. We believe you. We understand you. We support you. The 22nd of February, European Day for Victims of Crime, is a moment to pause, to think of all victims, those who continue to suffer crimes, and those who continue to suffer because of past crimes. It's a moment to show we stand with them and for them, to recognise their pain and their needs. But I think it's also a moment to celebrate every survivor, to celebrate their strength and power, to insist that the term victim is an expression of strength, not weakness nor shame. That's why I also want to thank all those victims I've spoken to, all those victims who put themselves through the justice process, who've contributed to studies and research, who have chosen to turn their suffering into good so that others won't suffer the same. Thank you for your inspiring stories of resilience and growth, stories that fill my day with hope and passion to seek change and speak out on your behalf and for all those whose voices go unheard. As the great Winston Churchill once said, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. And yes, your stories of suffering and injustice light a fire indignation in me. They help me see the urgency and necessity of our work. They help me see that every day that change is delayed is another day that you suffer needlessly. So I say thank you to all those also who've been working to make that change, to support victims, to get them the justice they are entitled to ease the pain and trauma when they feel they cannot go on. Thank you to victim support workers, to police officers, prosecutors, judges, lawyers, medical staff, educators, civil servants, politicians, and the many others who choose to make a difference, who help victims, who, no matter what their job is, choose to take a moment to hold out a hand, to give of themselves, whether they have to or not. As Maya Angelou professed, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. You might never hear the words of thanks and gratitude, but believe me, they are there, and I've heard them. I want you to know that your actions are seen, are felt, are received with gratitude. But I also want you to know those actions are not enough. This isn't a criticism, it is a call to action. And I make the call knowing how much can be done, how much is possible, how much you can impact victims' lives. In Europe, there is a momentum. New European laws are being negotiated to address domestic violence, stalking, and other gender-based violence crimes. Action is being taken on child sexual exploitation and soon on human trafficking. The European Commission has promised to publish a new directive this spring which will help all victims of crime. They're committed to helping all victims, to make sure that none are forgotten, that the fundamental rights of all victims are protected. We await that publication with great impatience. But you don't have to wait for the European Union to act. You have the power to change victims' lives today in your own country through your own actions. This is perhaps the most important fact of all. You're not powerless to help the most vulnerable in your societies. You can make the change happen long before the EU says you must make the change happen. So how can you make a change? Well, we already know many of the answers. Just last year, Victim Support Europe published a critical paper on establishing a national victim support framework. It's simple in its concept, but will be transformative for every victim in your country. It's a framework to ensure that any victim who needs support can access the right of service and the right type of service for them when they need it. It's simple in many ways, but it asks all of you to change the way you think. Just as we approach our health services in a structured, coherent, strategic and long-term way, so too must we for victim support. We must have a national victim strategy, coordination committees of state and civil society actors working together. You must act to build the resilience of your citizens, working with children and adults alike to help them cope, no matter what the cause of the crime is. You must act to build the ability of family, friends and colleagues of victims to support them. We're not born knowing how to help victims, so we must learn. We must teach them. You must have a national support service helping all victims, complemented by specialist services for different groups. They must be accessible across the whole country, in person, through your 116006 helpline, through online support and more. They must conform with national standards. In Latvia, you have at least 300,000 victims of serious crime every single year, 15% of your population. Do you know how many victims receive support every year? If it's only a few thousand, many, many more thousands are alone and in need of help. Support has to be accessible. You must have mandatory referral systems for victims from the police to victim support. It's one of the most effective ways to help victims reach support. And you must also develop support within criminal proceedings, accompanying victims, victim specialists in your police and prosecution services, court-based assistance, and multi-agency support services for the most vulnerable. Support is everyone's job. It's only by working together that we can make it truly successful. As the author and activist Helen Keller once said, until the great mass of the people should be filled with a sense of responsibility for each other's welfare, social justice can never be attained. The National Victim Support Framework gives you the roadmap to achieve these changes. It is just a question of action. And this is just the start of what is possible, of what is necessary. Victim Support Europe has also released its Safe Justice paper. In it, we reflect on the fact that after 40 years of European legislation on victims, victims continue to face the same problems, the same failures. The problem is that we're trying to fit victims' rights around the existing justice system. This will never work. Every year, victims' rights are looked at and limited or refused because it doesn't help the police or the prosecutor or the judge, or in some way might affect the defence. Victims' rights, particularly their fundamental rights, cannot be subordinate to the system. They must be balanced fairly with it. This is why we call on all countries to adopt a safe justice approach. Safe justice is a holistic, systematic, needs-driven, rights-based, victim-sensitive approach to justice, which includes in its objectives upholding of victims' rights and the protection of the physical, psychological, and emotional safety of the victim. It benefits the justice system as a whole and supports the creation of a fairer, safer society. The concept is one where victims' rights are first developed based on the requirement to address the harm experienced by victims, the requirement to meet the needs of victims, and the requirement to operate in a victim-sensitive way. What this means is that the success of our justice systems should no longer be measured solely by their efficiency, by whether the innocent are found innocent and the guilty found guilty. The welfare and the safety of victims must be an integral part of justice objectives. And of course, these victims' rights should subsequently be reviewed to achieve a fair balance, taking into account wider justice principles such as fair trial rights, impartiality, and due process. Within the Safe Justice paper, we've made many recommendations for the improvement of victims' rights and their implementation within criminal proceedings. I won't list them now, but in essence, through their implementation, you will improve victims' abilities to report crimes, their trust in our authorities, the support they receive, the protection they receive, their ability to be heard and participate, and the compensation and the restorative processes they can access. This should all be combined within the strategic framework and through a strategic framework. And and with legal remedies to make sure that these rights are real and that victims can seek redress where they are breached. There's so much more that I could say. This sounds daunting, I know, which is why a long-term strategy is needed, one that allows for continuous improvement in a coherent and comprehensive way. These are changes we have to commit to. Remember the words of the late Martin Luther King Jr. Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. I hope you take these words to heart and use this day, 22nd of February, to make change happen in your country. Thank you.